I was right about Nintendo Switch 2 backward compatibility, and you said modded vintage gamer. What? Damn, over half a mil.
Over 2 years ago, I made a video.
Oh, you know what? I could like at least listen to it though. That's doable, right? Okay. You're saying there's a chance. Game on, and I'm gonna snap, 'cause I'm a motherfucking crackhead. Game on, get your game on. Let's hope he fucking reads my bluff. Or doesn't read it, rather. Oh god, let's see. He moves Torch. He plays a card. And Iron Fist Cloak to move Cloak over. Oh, I won, dude. Let's go. Elsa just totally buffed up Iron Man with Galacta. Get wrecked. Oh yeah. And that is why Elsa is super clutch. Victory. Yo, Flame Blaziken, thank you for this recommendation, dude. I'm definitely... So hold on, here, why don't I do this? I'm gonna pause the music so that we can all at least listen to this video, okay? That's usually what I end up doing while I'm working anyway. I just listen to videos. Because that much we can do.
That made some people quite unhappy. In that video, I talked about the challenges Nintendo would face in bringing backward compatible Switch 1 titles to their successor hardware, which we now know as the Nintendo Switch 2. Talk about backward compatibility on new...
Now, for the record, this is a video that was put out a month ago, just for context, and it currently stands at 558,000 views, so big shout out to Modern Vintage Gamer, bro. Sick.
Nintendo hardware. We're all assuming that the new Nintendo hardware will be fully backward compatible with the Nintendo Switch, but I'm here to tell you
I do too.
I wouldn't be so sure.
I like how when people are informed as well.
Root cause of the backward compatibility problem. A new SoC to power a new Switch hardware will simply not be binary compatible with this code, even though it's still on ARM64. Now, to be very clear, I never once suggested that the Switch 2 won't ever be backward compatible. In reality, I discussed the various challenges Nintendo would face and how they could solve them in bringing backward compatible Switch 1 titles to the Switch 2. This is because I asserted that the Switch 2 SoC would not be binary compatible with the Switch 1 SoC, and Nintendo would face challenges in running Switch 1 games on the Switch 2. And I walked through each possible scenario that Nintendo could choose to solve this backward compatibility problem, hence the name of the video. A lot of people were quick to discredit me, saying MVG is saying that backward compatibility is not happening. Now, while the majority of people understood the concerns, many were quick to disregard me, calling me a grifter, a clickbaiter. MVG doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just a dumb YouTuber. Of course, the Switch
That's
will be
fucked.
100% backward
That's pretty
compatible
mean. I don't like that.
because Nintendo has solved this problem for years, ever since the days of the Game Boy Color. I was also told that my information about the Switch 2 SoC not being binary compatible with the Switch 1 SoC was false. Now, for the record, if you are new here, I do want to point a few things out. I've worked in the video game industry since 2019. I've developed a custom engine that powers many old retro games
What's
via
up, babes?
emulation known as the Carbon engine. I've shipped games on all major consoles, and before this, I've worked with many various homebrew efforts since 2001. I love software development, I love video game hardware, and it's something that I completely nerd out about. Now, my video about the Switch 2 backward compatibility problem was not meant to be clickbait. In fact, as we'll find out, I was exactly right. So this particular information comes from...
Alright, so far, I like what my man is putting out there, okay? Like, he's... And what I do appreciate so far about this video is he is being such a fucking professional. It's not even funny. Wait a minute. Iron Man is -5 now? Bro. Dude, I'm gone. I'm not dealing with Huang Hazmat, bro. No.
Escaped.
Absolutely the fuck not. You guys, come on. Learn how to have some fucking fun, please. Anyway. I love how Homeboy is acknowledging all the people that were shit talking him. And instead of like coming back at motherfuckers, like he's just like, nah, bro, go fuck yourself, but in the nicest way possible. Like literally just like, you know how they say success is the best revenge, or like the best defense is a good offense. In this case, having more having more and adding more credibility to your claims is probably better than just even trying to have these stupid, mindless, pointless like arguments with random people that you don't know over the internet. The professional comeback, yeah. All right, let me keep playing this.
The Ask a Developer blog series on Nintendo.com, and it really kind of goes into pretty detailed analysis and discussion about how Nintendo were able to solve the backward compatibility problem, hence what I was talking about 2.5 years ago. And right from the jump, they're very transparent about how they were able to solve this problem. And it is one of those particular scenarios that I outlined in my video. So let's go ahead and kind of read through this. Now it says here, right from the beginning, we wanted the new system to be able to play Switch games, but back then we were told there would be technical challenges. When we first started Switch 2 development, the focus was enhancing its performance as hardware, namely expanding its capacity. So what they're saying here is that the new platform, the focus of the new platform is the new platform, rather than thinking about, you know, playing old games on.
Yeah, so I'm going to interject just to kind of give my 2 cents as he's explaining things so that I can like add to the overall conversation that's being had with the Switch 2 and whatnot. I've always known this, and I don't have the credibility that MVG has, where he's been in the industry, he's shipped games, he's done all that, and that's awesome. But what I will say, what I have at the very least that I take pride in is common sense. Okay? And we've seen for a very long time over the years how slowly but surely a lot of these companies that are still making consoles, they in their own ways are drifting ever so, I don't want to say slightly, but they're drifting at their own separate paces as to this whole idea of backwards compatibility. Like some are, of course, like backwards compatibility to the consumer, to us players, is very important, because why wouldn't we want to play any game, whether it's new or old, for that matter? And also, you know, like why wouldn't people like at least like to have the option? You know what I'm saying? Like taking options away from people kind of sucks. It's very like, it's gross. You know what I'm saying? And so what I'm trying to get at is I've always felt like, based on that slow turn away, like, you know, certain consoles, like they have the ability to do so, but then like look at Nintendo, for example. It's like you can't stick a Wii U game in a Switch. You can't stick a Wii game. You can't stick any of their old games into their modern shit, is my point. So what I'm getting at is how it is what it is. And unfortunately, they are like if we are to expect companies to make newer and better pieces of hardware, they have to prioritize what is on the come up, like what's coming up as far as the technological standpoint, or like, you know, all that. Where does all that stand first versus like, yes, we of course want to have, you know, our older representation, but is it even gonna be worth it? You know what I'm saying? Like, and that to me is kind of shitty, if I'm being honest. but that's the truth. So here we go. I'll keep going.
On that new platform. That sort of is something that comes later on potentially through the life cycle of
I think I won.
design and development. And then it goes on to say, for example, Nintendo DS games were playable on 3DS and Wii games were playable on Wii U. But it was difficult to achieve the same level of compatibility with Switch 2 because the hardware design approach was different from those systems.
Right.
What they're saying here is that in the past, Nintendo has always solved backward compatibility by simply providing the appropriate backward compatible hardware on the motherboard. So when we talk about the 3DS to the DS, there is backward compatible DS hardware. The DS had backward compatible GBA hardware on the motherboard. The
Right.
Wii U had backward compatible Wii hardware on its motherboard. So it was always a lot easier just to run those games. And
Yeah.
you'll notice that those
Makes
games
sense.
are always running in their own little sandbox. Now, moving on, it says, it's tricky to explain. Maybe the easiest way to understand it is that the methods used to achieve compatibility between Nintendo DS and 3DS and between Switch and Switch 2 are completely different. Simply put, those systems were compatible because Nintendo 3DS contained DS hardware and Wii U contained Wii hardware, as we said. However, Switch 2 doesn't contain any Switch hardware. And this is where we get into the meat of
Wow,
the discussion.
that is a huge. Okay, see, like that's crazy. I didn't even know that, and that honestly changes the whole conversation up right there, just off of that fat piece of fact. Is that the Switch 2 is more focused on the Switch 2. It's more focused on itself. Now, granted, there's digital versions of, you know, like their library when it comes to the expansion pass and the Nintendo Switch Online service, but like, you know, I'm pretty sure it's a little different having like I guess like digital games, digital software versus like physical hardware, but let's keep listening to what he has to say.
Does this mean that Switch and Switch 2 aren't compatible at a hardware level? Exactly. This time we decided to take on the challenge of using new technology to run Switch games. If we tried to use the technology like
but not
software
really.
emulators, we'd have to run Switch 2 at full capacity. But that would mean the battery wouldn't last so long, so we did something that's somewhere in between a software emulator and hardware compatibility. Now, of course, we still don't have all the information in front of us, but Nintendo has given us enough information to kind of piece together how they have solved for this. And it's essentially a combination of software-based emulation with hooks into the T239 and some type of translation layer. Now, we have to remember that we're talking about two different architectures when it comes to the NVIDIA
Microarchitectures,
SoCs.
he said it on the screen.
We're talking about Maxwell-based, and we're also talking about Ampere with the new SoC. Now, on the CPU side, I would say that there probably hasn't been much work, and this is where the hardware itself is doing most of the heavy lifting. In fact, there's probably a very thin wrapper in the emulation layer that's been developed that effectively just intercepts any type of OS and service level calls and then almost one-to-one translates those to the new SoC architecture. Translation layers is something that's becoming a lot more popular when we talk about modern emulation techniques. If you're emulating a system from the past that runs the same architecture as the target system, then a translation layer can really be very effective rather than just writing a traditional emulation stack. So on the CPU side, it doesn't appear as though Nintendo really needed to do that much work to build a translation layer between the two systems. Now on the GPU side, Nintendo almost certainly have built a lot of code in their emulation software in order to facilitate all the various aspects of emulating a Switch 1 GPU on the Switch 2. Now, when we're talking about the GPU side, it becomes a lot more complicated because we're talking about shaders that need to be recompiled to run on the Switch 2. Now, you might be wondering, what is the reason for recompiling shaders? Well, at the end of the day, when a Switch game is shipped and sent off for certification, everything is embedded into that ROM file, into the the ROM that you download if you purchase with the eShop, for example. The driver stack itself is embedded into the game itself, which means that for backward compatibility to work, that needs to be reconstructed on a Nintendo Switch 2. And because the Maxwell architecture is different from Ampere, we're talking about binary incompatibilities. It also means that shaders will need to be recompiled as well.
Makes sense.
So they'll effectively need to be decompiled and then rebuilt in real time to run on the Switch 2. And I think that's what Nintendo has done here. Now, I think a really great example to kind of explain this in better terms is this piece of software that I actually made a video on, I think about 2 years ago, known as Vita to HOS. And basically, this will take native Vita executables and they can run natively on the Nintendo Switch. And this is a proof of concept that I made a video on. It just basically displayed a simple triangle, but it was running a Vita executable on a Switch without any smoke or mirrors. And as you can see, it's supporting a translation layer, not an emulator. And again, this is what I think Nintendo is doing on the CPU side. But if you look further down into the README file and look at the information, you can see here that they're talking about the various ways that they have to recompile shaders. In this instance, in order for the Vita shaders to run on the Switch, they need to be recompiled with Vita 3K, which is a Vita emulator, or at least the part of the code that manages the recompilation.
That's so
side.
crazy.
They also use UAM for shader compilation. So Nintendo themselves have set up a website that shows the list of compatible Nintendo Switch games on the Nintendo Switch 2. And this is a very...
Which I will add, I'm pretty sure, just by looking at what he has here, the site that I actually found it actually looks like it's the same one, but what I have is the more updated version because obviously, like I said earlier, the video is from a month ago. So, do I know that Sonic Unleashed PC port? I know of the Sonic Adventure Battle 2 upscaled version, if that's what you're talking about, but other than that, I don't know. They only could do the backward compatibility when moving from the GameCube to the Wii, but even then, it was only the first gen of the Wii console. It wasn't on all of them. Yeah, I don't like how, like, there were shit versions of the Wii. Like, they decided, like, oh yeah, we're just gonna take out, you know, like, we're just gonna take out the freaking GameCube controller ports, you know, like, why... Like, who's gonna care? You know what I'm saying? Like, everybody cared, bro. Like, what are you talking about? Anyway.
Interesting chart for a couple of reasons that I want to talk about. The first one is, if we take a look at this chart, you can see that there is a lot of blue here, and it kind of tells you that almost the entire suite of Nintendo Switch games will run via backward compatibility. But let's take a closer look at everything. So this is the Nintendo games, the first-party Nintendo games, and you can see here that we're talking only a very small percentage of first-party Nintendo games not running on the Nintendo Switch 2, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Of course, they're the ones that built the emulation stack. They're also the ones that basically know the hardware better than anyone else. So, of course, as they're designing the backward compatibility layer, they can continue to iterate and get their games up and running first. So if we take a
So here's the one thing I'll also add on that I think is interesting is that small percentage of games that aren't readily backwards compatible on the Switch 2. Oddly enough, and you can call me out if I'm wrong, but usually when things like that happen, for reasons that are, you know, kind of out there, I feel like that small percentage of games will go up in value, despite them not being maybe as popular as your expected AAA based Nintendo Switch game. But I just find that I'm not a huge fan of when stuff like that happens, but like it's inevitable. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm pretty sure that is literally what's going to happen. So, yeah.
Look at the partner games, which there's over 15,000. By the way, that is a lot of Switch games, 15,000. That's a lot more than I had ever expected that there would be. You can see that there is, let's say, 22% of that 15,000 have no issues during backward compatibility testing, which means that these games should run perfectly, right? So if you look at this next
They
block,
should.
you can see that we're talking almost 80%. Let's say it's 70% because there is a little bit down here, and of course, you know, maybe 2% up here. But let's say it's 70% of games that can be started, but further tests are in progress. So this isn't necessarily telling us that all these games are going to run fine. This is telling us that, yes, the game can start and get in game, but because we have 15,000 of them, we still need to do further testing to ensure that these games are fully compatible. Now, what I would expect to see is that this list, this blue list, this solid blue list, should start to get bigger as this kind of lighter blue gets smaller. But the big takeaway for me here, guys, is that this is no guarantee that these games will run from start to finish. All they're saying here is that these games can be started and further tests are in progress.
Right.
So
okay. Yeah. So there's, okay. I'm glad he pointed that out, because for someone that might be looking at this super fast and not paying close attention to the indicators that describe what each shade of the colors are, because if you look at the one graph on the left, it's like all blue. So it's like, okay. And then like you look at the other one next to it and you probably wouldn't even think twice. But in actuality, the different shades of blue actually mean something. So very good call.
Reminds me of the old days of the
Peppa Pig
original
scalper's about to have a
Xbox
field day.
backward
Yeah.
compatibility on the 360. There were about 500 titles that would run on the Xbox 360, but many of them actually had issues. One great example is Jet Set Radio Future, a game that was listed on the backward compatibility list, but as you kind of progress further into the game, more problems started to occur. And Nintendo hasn't really gone through all these games yet because they simply need a lot more time in order to kind of, you know, check these off and say that these games are fully working. Now, this is the list of the partner games that are currently not able to start up on the Switch 2 via backward compatibility. And you can see there's a list of about 150 of them.
That's
now,
crazy.
By themselves, this looks like a very big list of games.
That does.
But when you compare it to the 15,000 partner games, it's actually quite a small percentage. But what's interesting here is that Nintendo is continuing to kind of work through and investigate the reason why some of these games aren't starting. Now, I also want to be very transparent with you guys and let you know that some of the Carbon Engine titles that I've worked on are also on this list as well. Here's an example of one right here, Tripwell DX. There's also a couple of others that are on this list. Now, unfortunately, I can't really talk about the discussions about backward compatibility in too much detail as it pertains to the stuff that I'm working on, but I am confident that Nintendo will be able to rectify these issues. But the big takeaway here, guys, really is that 100% backward compatibility was never going to be a thing for the Nintendo Switch 2. It was always going to be a situation where we're looking at games that simply just don't run. And I think at the end of the day, Nintendo certainly has done the right thing when it comes to backward compatibility, especially since the Tegra X1 on the motherboard solution was not an option this time around. And look, ultimately, I think this is going to be good enough, but I am still a little bit curious about this 70% or so of games that can be started and further tests in progress, because for me, guys, this doesn't necessarily tell me that all these games are going to run end to end. There still potentially could be a lot of issues when it comes to backward compatibility. And really, this is kind of what I was talking about all along in my particular video. And I hope you guys can understand what I was going for here. I was not trying to, you know, upset anyone or, you know, clickbait a video or anything along those lines. It's really just about education and understanding that although Nintendo in the past has done things a certain way when it comes to backward compatibility, they obviously, and they have since confirmed that they're doing things in a much more software-based way, which I think is very interesting. So there you have it, guys. That is backward compatibility on the Nintendo Switch 2. As mentioned, Nintendo did have a problem. They have seemed to have solved it, but it really does remain to be seen how well it actually performs in real-world tests. We haven't seen anything from Nintendo at this point about backward compatibility. We haven't seen anything in the tree houses or the various press events yet. So we'll have to see exactly how it performs in the real world. I know some people are questioning, will there be updates and enhancements and maybe some type of resolution bump or frame rate bump? I don't believe that to be the case. I think this is going to be traditional emulation where it basically tries to run one-to-one with the original game. I think anything beyond that is going to be just based on Switch 2 patches that come out as the kind of updates that you've seen for games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom that have enhancements to frame rates and resolutions. But anything that is backward compatible based on, you know, your Nintendo account or Switch 1 games that you put into your Switch will run pretty much just as you would have expected them to without any type of performance boost. But they are just my thoughts and opinions on backward compatibility on the Nintendo
Pineapple?
Switch 2. It's a great thing that Nintendo has solved the problem. It will still remain to be seen what the execution of that looks like in the real world, and when people actually start testing it themselves to see what type of issues that they may or may not come up against when they start to run their favorite games. But we are going to leave it here for today's episode, guys. If you liked it, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.
You know what? First of all, I'm very glad you guys put me onto this this channel. I'm so surprised I've never heard of Modern Vintage Games, bro. I'm subscribed right now. I literally just subbed. I don't sub to everybody, but when I do, it's somebody that knows what the fuck they're talking about, okay? And this guy seems like he has certainly earned my trust. So, what he says, he provides a lot of context, a lot of proof to back his claims. And I mean, it's something I guess we can all agree on that. How do I want to put this? Like, I can say with confidence that that was not something that I was really worried about per se, but now after seeing how it could, you know, in turn it could lead to issues with players and whatever, I'm not that much concerned than I was originally. But I mean, you know, like, we'll see when the time comes is the best way I can put it, if I'm being honest. You know what I'm saying? Like, I hope that makes sense. But thank you for sharing. I do appreciate that. And actually, you know what? To add to this, I'll also say that that is kind of one of the main reasons as to why I'm actually looking forward to playing Street Fighter 6 on the Switch 2, because that is a game where I would really be able to feel a difference, because it's a fighting game, and fighting games, you know, take a certain level of precision when performing combos and execution as a whole. And because of the nature of, you know, how a lot of, you know, how a lot of that stuff functions, that is like one of the things I will be feeling out for when we get around to playing Street Fighter 6 on the Switch 2. So, yeah, I know, I definitely appreciate you bringing this up, because, you know, like, you know, we're obviously getting ready for the Switch 2. We're hyped up for the Switch 2. I'm having a whole stream, subathon, launch party for it. So this is some good stuff to kind of keep in the back of our minds at the very least. You know what I'm saying? So good shit. Very good shit, I will say.